Yeah. I'd say it's safe to talk, or it's a good point to talk about normies and comfies. I use the word comfy all the time because there's pressure on Jimmy, there's pressure on David Dole and Sam Cedar and Vosh. I call him Vosh the sheepdog. There's pressure on them. I can't even say Vosh anymore. I just always call him Vosh the
Caleb
sheepdog.
Maupin calls him Jabba the Bosch. Because people get stuck in his lair or whatever Jabba the Hutt had.
Yeah. Yeah, he's pretty. I don't know, when he's debating people, I think he uses unfair tactics sometimes,
Yeah.
but he's good at it. But the point is that normie people who watch those shows also apply a kind of pressure, unlike or not unlike the money pressure. Like if you, and it is money pressure indirectly. If you've got big donors like the Young Turks, like Jeffrey Katzenberg and the $20 million he helped raise for them, and Jeffrey Katzenberg is directly connected to the DNC machinery and the CIA and the military intelligence complex. So there's Cenk now an apologist clearly because of the money, and it's easy to follow that trail. But people like David Dole are harder to figure out because what they're trying to do is appeal to comfortable, so-called progressives or so-called liberals or whatever you want to call them, people that are more on the left than conservatives. And if they don't like what he's saying, they won't keep subscribing. And so his money flow will abate, or he'll get demonetized, like you, or not allowed to be monetized like me. And what'll happen is over time, and Jimmy, I think, may feel this kind of pressure too. If he punches at something that Cornel West is in favor of, if he punches, I mean, he'll. I think he's brave enough to punch at Cornel West, if he wasn't directly connected to MPP. But I think there's pressure to keep the comfy people happy, to keep them coming back. And if you're going to start a revolution, you have to get your hands dirty. You've got to work with grubby populists who don't have as much financial acumen or even as much information. So if we're thinking about revolutions, they usually start from the bottom half of the economy. But the bottom half of the economy is not necessarily the typical viewer, listener of these podcasts, of these YouTube channels. We've got Elizabeth Warren progressives and Pete Buttigieg people. They're watching they're
Yeah.
watching these shows. And if you start saying things like, for example, I was pushing Bernie or Bust. My channel used to be called Bernie or Bust Television. And that was my whole thing. I kept saying we have to apply leverage. We have to think like unions. We have to tell the comfy Democrats that if they don't nominate Bernie, then they're going to get Donald Trump no matter what. And that didn't piss off populists. That didn't piss off grubby people. That pissed off the comfy people. They didn't want to hear that. And some of them, well, even Jimmy the second time around, and even Tim Black, who were verbal proponents of Bernie or Bust the first time around, pulled back and they stopped talking about it. And they wouldn't have me. I kept trying to get on their shows. Victor Tiffany, the original gangster of Bernie or Bust, in the first go around was allowed to speak even on national television about it. But then it became unpopular. It became unpopular on the left. It was divisive, or whatever else you want to say. It was uncouth. And so if you wanted to have credibility with your normie audiences, you weren't allowed to talk about Bernie or Bust. And I think Tim Black and Jimmy Dore both caved into some of that pressure. Mike Figueredo was kind of weak when it came right down to it. And then David Dole is, and I like to not be mean to Kyle and Crystal and Sagar, and I like to say that they're really trying, but they have big audiences,
Yeah.
and it's not easy to push something that, the kind of truth telling of non-electoral solutions. How many people do you hear anywhere that are saying, no, we should absolutely not even think about electoral solutions until we get some power and get some leverage? How many can you name them on one hand?
It's the smaller ones that are getting suppressed that say that. So it's like
Yeah.
you, and like I talk about it, and then it's people that have less than 1,000 subscribers, some of which are in the audience, and that's it. Some of the MCSC, I think pretty much at this point, all of them, everyone at MCSC, um, and some of the deep dive journalists like Whitney Webb, Derek Bros, like they propose like strategies outside of electoral politics, but those they're not in the pop YouTube sphere, right? In the pop YouTube sphere, I can't like count a single person that's promoting that. Anyone more than like 50,000 subscribers focusing on solutions outside of electoral politics, I can't think of one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so let's start our own party then. Let's call it the,
Yeah.
voting is solve anything party, and let's get shit started.
So what's your idea of a revolution? Like how would that look like?
Well, I'm a part-time truck driver. I'm a full-time university professor, a music professor, and a part-time truck driver to make ends meet. I got downsized in the Pennsylvania state system of higher education. On the west side of the state, where the graduation rates are lower, they decided to cut programs, whole programs. So I was a full professor with tenure, and then they said, nope, no more music programs. We're going to chop most of them on the west side of the state. So then I ended up on the east side of the state, and I took a huge pay cut. And so now I'm driving truck to make ends meet. And when you talk to truck drivers and teachers, what you realize is, whether they do or not, and it's, some of them are, that if they stuck together, or even if they separately decided not to work, even for a few days, it'd be over.
Hmm.
That's really probably the most practical solution, is to get a big group of essential people. And if you had the reason I like to think of combination of truckers and teachers is because truckers are traditionally conservative and teachers are traditionally liberal. That word, I hate that word now, but
Yeah.
so you've got people with varying connections to the community. You've got a pretty broad, because you'd need support. The teachers and the truckers would need the broad support of the population. And I don't know if you know about all the wildcat strikes that happened in red states, where teachers were actually, without even the leadership of any unions, they were just saying, "Hey, this is too much. We're going to stay out until you meet our demands." And in other countries like Brazil and other places where the truckers say, "Hey, dude, we're going to shut you the fuck down
Hmm.
unless you do what we want." Now, the problem would be to make sure we knew what our demands were, and how would big groups of people like that even agree on what we need? You might have to pick just one thing, and I would pick Medicare for all, but I don't know what you'd pick. But you'd have to have a demand that was very easy to agree on, and then you just have to stop working until you got it, and then everyone would say, "Oh, that's how you get things done. That's, it's not incremental. It's not, oh, we got to work this assignment, this committee assignment, and that, person that we know across the aisle. We just have to stop working for a few days. We'll get all the COVID relief we need. We'll get all the rent relief we need. We'll get all the prescription help we need. We'll get good schools, and just, but start with maybe one or two things and just say, this is it. This is it. We're just not going to work." And you wouldn't have to then go into the streets. You could stay safe, because it's dangerous to go into the streets, because not because the people are violent, but because the authorities that would crack down on the people are violent.
Yeah.
So the reason things happened in 1968 was because of the protests, and without the protests, the Civil Rights Act wouldn't have happened. And so that's the answer. We've got to be organized enough to withhold our labor, and to make clear, cogent demands, and then be willing to stay out away from our work as long as it takes. And that's the reason they don't want us to have Medicare, because if we have Medicare for all, then we don't have Cobra. We don't, because it's easier to strike if you have medical insurance anyway.
Exactly.
That's probably the main reason Joe Biden has always been against it. And the same thing with Social Security and other safety net things. It's a lot easier for people to exert their will and to be autonomous from their employers if those things are guaranteed by the government. Then the employer doesn't have as much leverage over us. We're kind of puny and without, and that's why both conservative Democrat, well, every Democrat, that's why all the Democrats and the Republicans haven't done what it takes to get us the kind of government offered help we need to feel secure, even if we don't have a job.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They're that's why like all of them, all the politicians don't support Medicare for all because it makes it if we have that covered, then it makes it so much easier for us to get out and protest, like how other countries do it,
Yeah.
who have healthcare. Like for example, France. Look at what they do. And I remember Jimmy was promoting like a yellow vest movement. I don't know if you remember that. Like he would wear it on his show, and Graham Elwood would wear it, and they'd wear it to their live shows. Like what happened to that?
Yeah.
That used to be a focus.
I used to do that too. That on Facebook, I think I tried to start a yellow vest movement. I think I called it the green vest movement because I can't tell what color those vests are anyway. And it would
Oh
be
yeah,
cool
some
if,
of them are green.
yeah, if we could tie it to the environment somehow. Like, and I haven't mentioned that as a demand, but we absolutely have to
Mhm.
make a demand in terms of protecting the environment.
And then this is like on top of that, like when people also go on the ground, like you mentioned, like some people just like not going to work, but when people go out on the ground and they go to events, like for example, the ones that I'm trying to organize or the ones that people on my Discord are starting to organize, like they're starting to organize more events around Assange. And then they
Good.
can collaborate with other people that are protesting for other issues, like for like against censorship, or like what happened in early January with Force to Vote, and then those people went to those same people went to the protests in support of Julian Assange and freeing him. We can get more than that. Like it's expanding now across the country. Like all these different events, like the March for Medicare for All, which I just had Savage Joy and Ricky Rance to talk about. Like they can collaborate with other movements. Eventually, when we have all these different movements collaborating with each other, we can get, a general strike. Like we
Yeah.
can all coordinate with each other to do that. And then when people go to these events, they realize how much they have in common with each other. And then from there, we can get with the election integrity activists, which will play a huge key role in starting a third party. Like if people want to start a third party, that's how you can start one. Having people who understand how the system works. And so it has to be combined with all these people already realizing that they have things in common, that they all have to come together. But what I see with MPP is they're putting the cart before the horse. I don't know if you also see that.
Yes. If you think about it, the reason Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were murdered, most likely, I think Bernie pointed out that what they were calling for is poor people's marches, and Bernie was calling for that too, and uniting poor people because you said we need to see what we have in common, and you have to think, well, what is the main thing? And there were the Black Panthers were working directly with rednecks. They were working with white militias. That was dangerous. I don't think the CIA liked that at all. That we had people of color working with white supremacists,
Hmm.
to figure out that what we have in common is that we're getting fucked by a system that's designed to keep workers down, designed to keep people with stagnant wages and living paycheck to paycheck. It's about control. Because if they poured money into the bottom, the people at the top would get even more. They'd be richer. Nick Hanauer points that out when he's talking about plutocrats beware the pitchforks. He has a TED talk on that, and he's right. The rich people actually would do better if they would allow more money in at the bottom of the economy. But the reason they won't do that is because they would lose control of their
Yeah.
indentured servants. And so we need to figure out what, because you're talking about coalitions and how much people have in common. That's really the main thing. And that's why comfy people, the normie people, are almost useless in any kind of real revolution because they're too comfortable. You need the people who are not comfortable to see what they have in common, which is economic servitude. Our environment is being destroyed, and all the other problems with race and gender and trans rights and LGBTQ plus rights and all that. Those are all important issues. But if we united behind economics, and like George Carlin would teach us, you have owners, they own you. If we would figure out how to get those owners out of power, it's pitchforks and guillotines that are going to solve it. And what we have in common is our economic plight. The bottom 90% of the economy is worse off since 1950 and 1970s too. The whole bottom 90% is doing worse than they would have with fair economic policies. So why can't those 90% of people unite? But the top part of that bottom 90% is, too comfortable to roll up their sleeves and get in the streets and go on strike either. They have too much to lose. So if we're really going to get this job done, we pundit people, we independent journalists, or I'm not a journalist, but the independent journalists and the thought leaders that really want a solution, who speak the way Bernie and AOC have spoken, they need to realize that the normie people aren't going to do it. We need to focus our information dissemination on uncomfortable people, on people in swing states whose jobs have been shipped overseas, and people in the inner cities, people in Baltimore who lost all the manufacturing jobs, in Detroit and all the places where there used to be decent jobs for people of all colors. Those are the kinds of lines we need to unite along. It isn't about race; it's about class. And Jimmy has that right. It is, that's what he said the MPP is about. It's about class first and foremost, but then all the messaging is for people who are comfortable.
That's what I see also.
How do we get the message to the less comfortable people? Like via YouTube or Twitter. I don't see that as an easy. I don't know if that's, maybe we need to be creative and figure out how to get the messaging to people who aren't as comfortable. Why do we work so hard getting the normie people the message?
I don't see enough of them on the ground, trying to recruit people on the ground, talking to activist groups and having these activist groups work closely with them. I'm not seeing that.
Yeah. Not with people.
Yeah, no, not at all. They're more focused on trying to appeal to the people that watch channels like Jimmy Dore's show. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to do more than just that. You have to do more than just go on like a tour of independent left news shows. You have to also go on shows that are on the right. You have to go on the ground. There's so much you have to do.
We have to reach truck drivers.
Yeah.
The message has to get to truck drivers. It has to get to Amazon workers. It has to get to essential workers and teachers. It has to get to everybody who can cripple the economy.
100%.
The normie people aren't going to do that.
100%. I want to ask you about the Black Panther Party. What are your thoughts on them, and do you think that there's things that we can learn from them? For example, organizing, like by opting out of the system and forming communities. What are some things that you think we can learn from them?
Maybe the biggest is that they took care of their community. Financially, medically, they were a huge benevolent organization trying to help people survive, with their rent and with everything else. They were there. What are your needs? Let me help you. Let's figure out what you need. Let me watch your kids while you go to the store. That was on the ground. That was, we're here to take care of our people. And then when you do that, and Bernie did that too in his campaign, he was out in the countryside and in poor areas trying to listen to what the people need. He was trying to say, what do you need? And I think that was the right track. You need to be out there compassionately hearing the problems and trying to help solve them. And that went across race lines with the Black Panthers somewhat, eventually, and as people started to figure out. And if that could happen, if people would use all of their zeal and fervor that they use to organize and to help elections be fair and all that, if and I don't want to shit on that, because we do need free and fair elections, but until we have some power, we're not going to get that either. But what we most need is to take care of each other economically, to take care of each other's medical problems, to make sure we have childcare, to make sure we have good schools and good infrastructure. And if that were the focus, maybe a philanthropic kind of outreach. So you start with the Black Panthers. I think that surprises people. They weren't just militant.
Hmm.
They were philanthropic, and that may be the most important thrust.
Yeah, and they were willing to work with anyone. Well, and I'm in the Black Panther study group right now with Skeptical Mantis, who's in the chat right now. He also has his channel. He interviews people on the ground. They didn't exactly work with white supremacists because the white supremacists didn't want to, but they did work with people from the South that wore the what's it called, the Confederate flag,
Yep.
as a symbol of rebellion. But yeah, the white supremacists did not want to work with them because they were racist. But they did work with some white people that would wear that, and they just work with people who were willing to work with them. And there were some isolated cases like with Reverend Annie, who has convinced some white supremacists into working with them. But I know like there's a whole controversy right now with like talking to Boogaloo Boys. But I mean, we have to be open to talking to anybody, and just because we talk to them doesn't mean that we're gonna adopt their. Doesn't mean that we're the ones that are gonna change and like adopt some of their ideologies. Like our goal is to change some of them. As from what I've seen, and from what I've talked to, like I've talked to Magnus, like he's not a white supremacist, and I'm sure you've also
Oh,
seen like his interviews, like with Jimmy and like on the comic and everything, like that. That's
yeah.
not like the norm of a Boogaloo Boy, from what I've been seeing from them.
Yeah, there's a lot of hope when you listen to that guy. He sounds really like he's on the right side of a lot of issues. And if
Yeah.
that's possible, then so the coalition. I was also thinking, as you're talking about churches, if there are any use for churches, they could definitely get the philanthropy going. Black churches kind of killed things for Bernie a couple times, already. But if you thought about churches and their possible role in philanthropy, and they got behind the idea that we're all in this together, and that people of every color and every creed could work together, and if that became the main focus of churches, is to do what Jesus said, which is to put down the mighty from their seats. That was actually his mother Mary who said that, but in the it says that the point of the Messiah is to put the mighty down from their seats and to send the rich away empty, and to bring justice to the poor. That's always been one of the things the Messiah is supposed to do in Jewish tradition too.
Hmm.
So if the churches could say, our point is to bring economic justice, that's a big topic in the Abrahamic faiths. That's supposed to happen. So why not get started on that? Try to bring economic justice to your communities, and try to then, a lot of Black preachers preach about social issues and economic issues and political issues in general. Why not preach that? Why not preach that we're all in this together, and that we need to work together to make effective solutions to the social problems we have? And I know they do that, but if they could say, and it's okay to use leverage. It's okay to lose your job. It's okay to sacrifice yourself. That's a big part of people's faith, that it's okay to roll up your sleeves and take risks, and definitely work on behalf of your fellow humans.
Hmm.
So religious people, they don't, this is I'll tread lightly here, but it feels like that the central point of a lot of our best teachers in religion is being missed. That we aren't, as you know, people of faith aren't doing enough. I would love to talk to Cornel West about that. You
Yeah.
know, that people aren't doing enough to actually bring about economic justice, and that we have the organizations in place. You know, church people, that's a big group. And if they all decide, you know, like they've been so consistent about how they feel about abortion, and when voting time comes, in my memory, you know, they know how every candidate feels about that, and that's how they vote. If they could get behind economic relief and vote that way, or just insist without voting, you know, insist that the people who represent them do the right thing, everything would change very quickly, because that's a huge portion of the population.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but these corporations that buy off our politicians won't make it possible. I was gonna say also like talking to Chris Hedges about this because he's also a Christian. But
Yeah.
yeah, that would be so key if you were able to wake so many people up who are of faith, like people who are religious, by focusing on the economic issues and be like, hey, it's, you know, according to our religion, we are supposed to help, you know, the poor this way. Like we can't allow these people to continue to be exploited.